The orbital bombardment had started without warning. Kale pressed himself against the crumbling wall of the Vraxian settlement, feeling the reverberations of each plasma strike shake through his bones. The human trader had been negotiating a simple fuel contract when the Korthax fleet appeared in the system, their hatred for the Vraxian species legendary across 3 star systems. Now, as buildings collapsed and warriors scrambled to defensive positions, Kale found himself doing something incredibly stupid. He was running toward the nursery den. The Vraxians were a proud warrior race, standing nearly 8 feet tall with obsidian scales and razor-sharp claws that could tear through reinforced steel. They had conquered 12 worlds through sheer ferocity and military prowess. Their culture valued strength above all else, and weakness was met with exile or death. Cubs were raised in communal dens until they reached their 5th solar cycle, at which point they began combat training that would have broken most species. But cubs couldn't fight orbital bombardment. Kale kicked through the partially collapsed entrance of the nursery den, his human eyes struggling to adjust to the darkness. Emergency lights flickered weakly, casting red shadows across the stone walls. The building shuddered again, and dust rained from the ceiling. "Hello?" he called out in broken Vraxian. "Anyone here?" A small whimper answered him from the corner. 3 cubs huddled together beneath an overturned table, their scales not yet darkened to the deep black of adulthood. They were still the mottled gray-brown of younglings, their eyes wide with terror. The largest couldn't have been more than 4 cycles old. One of the smaller cubs, Rin, if the markings on his shoulder were accurate, was bleeding from a gash across his forearm. "It's okay," Kale said softly, though he knew they probably couldn't understand Standard. He approached slowly, hands raised. "I'm getting you out of here." The cubs hissed at him, baring tiny fangs. In their culture, accepting help was shameful. Even at this age, they'd been taught that warriors stood alone. Another explosion rocked the building. A support beam cracked overhead. Kale didn't have time for cultural sensitivity. He lunged forward, scooping all 3 cubs into his arms despite their protests. They weighed less than he expected, maybe 60 pounds each, but they fought like their lives depended on it. Claws raked across his jacket, tearing through the synth fabric. Rin bit down hard on his shoulder, tiny fangs piercing skin. Kale grunted but held firm. Yeah, I'm the enemy. Save it for later." He ran. The streets of the settlement had transformed into chaos. Adult Vraxians rushed past him toward defensive emplacements, their weapons primed and their war cries echoing off the walls. None of them looked twice at the human carrying their young. They were too focused on the battle above. In Vraxian culture, the strong protected themselves. These warriors would die before retreating, and they expected their cubs to understand that sacrifice. Kale's ship, the Meridian Runner, sat at the far end of the landing pad, her engines already primed for emergency takeoff. He'd prepared for a quick exit the moment the Korthax fleet appeared. It was standard procedure for human traders in war zones, always have an escape route. He was 50 meters from the ship when the defense shield failed. The plasma strike hit the communications tower to his left, and the explosion threw Kale off his feet. He twisted mid-air, protecting the cubs with his body as he hit the ground hard. Pain shot through his back and ribs. The cubs tumbled from his arms, dazed but alive. Rin was the first to recover. The small cub's eyes locked onto Kale's face, and for a moment, something like recognition passed between them. Then Rin grabbed his 2 denmates and started dragging them toward the ship. Kale pushed himself up, his vision swimming. His back screamed in protest, but he forced himself to move. He grabbed the nearest cub, the largest one, and carried it up the ramp. Rin had already herded the 3rd cub aboard. "Smart kid," Kale muttered. The Meridian Runner lifted off just as another plasma strike obliterated the landing pad. Kyle fought with the controls, his injured ribs making every breath agony, but he managed to angle the ship away from the settlement and punch through the atmosphere. Behind them, the Vraxian homeworld burned. The cubs huddled in the cargo bay, silent now, watching through the viewport as their world grew smaller. 2 weeks later, the Vraxian warrior fleet intercepted the Meridian Runner at the edge of the Talos system. Kale stood in the docking bay of the flagship Bloodfang, surrounded by 30 armored warriors who looked ready to tear him apart. Their commander, a massive female named Thesara, stood before him with her claws extended. Her mate, Chiron, stood beside her, equally imposing. "You took our cubs," Thesara growled, her translator rendering the words in perfect Standard. Explain yourself before we scatter your atoms across space. Kale met her gaze steadily. His ribs were still taped, and Rin's bite mark was infected despite the antibiotics. Your settlement was being destroyed. The nursery den was collapsing. I got them out. We did not ask for your help, human. No, Kale agreed. You didn't. Chiron stepped forward, his voice a low rumble. In our culture, warriors do not flee. We do not accept rescue. We stand and fight, or we die with honor. You have taught our cubs shame. I taught them to survive, Kale shot back. There's no honor in dead children. The cargo bay fell silent. Several warriors shifted uncomfortably. Challenging Vraxian culture was a death sentence, but Kale was too tired and in too much pain to care. The Sara's eyes narrowed. You do not understand our ways. Maybe not, Kale said. But I understand that those 3 cubs are alive right now because I ignored your ways. Rin's probably going to have a scar on his arm, and they're all traumatized, but they're breathing. That counts for something in my culture. Your culture is weak, Chiron spat. My culture survives, Kao countered. We don't throw away lives for abstract concepts like honor. We adapt. We protect the vulnerable. We do whatever it takes to make sure the next generation has a chance. Maybe that makes us weak in your eyes, but we're still here. Sara studied him for a long moment. Then slowly she retracted her claws. Bring the cubs. Rin entered first, his small frame barely reaching Kale's waist. The other 2 cubs followed, their eyes downcast in what Kale recognized as Vraxian shame. But Rin walked straight to Kale and pressed his head against the human's leg, a gesture of trust that made several warriors hiss in shock. The Sara looked at her son, then at Kale. Rin has chosen you as pack-kin. This is unprecedented. He's a good kid, Kale said quietly. Brave, smart. He got his demates to safety when I was down. Chiron's expression shifted, something like pride flickering across his features. He acted as a warrior should. He protected the weak, even though accepting my help was shameful? Kale asked. The Sara was silent for a long moment. Then she did something Kale never expected. She bowed her head slightly. A gesture of respect he'd only seen Vraxians offer to their greatest champions. You are correct, human. There is no honor in dead cubs. Perhaps ... There are things we can learn from your kind. As the Meridian runner departed the flagship later that day, Kale watched Rin standing in the docking bay with his parents, the small cub's hand raised in farewell. The human smiled despite his aching ribs. Humans didn't have claws or scales or warrior traditions spanning millennia. But they had something else, and stubborn, illogical refusal to let children die when they could be saved. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that changed everything.